In today's video, I'm going to walk you through how to use the brushes in the amazing Papers brush pack for Procreate. I'm going to talk about the basics so you can get started with the brushes, and I'll also walk you through how to use the brushes. I will give you lots of examples. If you're interested, please keep on watching. Hello and welcome to Color with Kendi, where we paint digital watercolor and gouache on the iPad in the app Procreate. In this video, I'm going to cover a bunch of different things, so I do have chapters and timestamps, which you can find in the description as well as the pinned comment, so feel free to skip around. And if you're interested in learning more about the pack, you can also find the link in the pinned comment and description. Let's begin. So the first thing we're going to do is a brief walkthrough of the files that you get in this set. So there are 4 different files. There's a brush set file, which I've already imported and installed. And if you need help with installation, I do have a video on that. Then there's a reference guide. This is basically a PDF, which you can open up in Adobe Acrobat, or you can bring it into Procreate. And it has tips for you to get started, and this is a really good guide to refer to whenever you need a little bit of help. There's some information on what the brushes are for and some information on how to use it. It's meant to be a supplemental guide to the brush tutorials, so you can check that out. Then we have 2 different canvases here. There is a sample canvas, and then there is a sample painting. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to open up the sample painting, and then I'm going to show you how to use some of the brushes on this. I think it's a lot easier to see it with a real example, so that's why there is a sample painting. This is a painting that I made with another brush set, but we're going to apply textures onto this with the amazing Papers brush pack. So if you are interested in making paintings like this was actually made with the amazing watercolor brush pack. This is watercolor effects, but we're going to talk about how you can change up what this looks like with Papers texture brushes. Now let's talk about the most important thing, which is the brush set itself. So once you import the brush set, it will come up at the very top of your brush library. It's called Amazing Papers, and there is a link at the very top. You can't go to the link directly by clicking on this because it is actually a brush. This is actually a brush. But you can type this up, colorwithkendi.com/brushes, and you can find the brush tutorials for all of my sets there. It's just one place for you to find everything. And this brush set, much like my other brush sets, does have some category headers, so it's easier for you to find the brushes. But sometimes it's a bit confusing, right, when you have a lot of brushes in one set. So these are the category headers. So we have some subtle paper textures, and each brush has numbers. So in case you forget the name, which is fine, I forget the names of the brushes all the time, you have the numbers. So it's easier to remember numbers, right? And then we have the not as subtle paper textures. These are a little bit more prominent compared to these subtle paper textures. And we have a large and a small for all of these brushes. So depending on your painting, you may choose a large version or the small version. It just gives you more options. Then we have canvas textures. We have a bunch of canvas textures here. And then we have some specialty canvas textures. These are really textured. It depends on the painting. It may not go with delicate paintings, but it can go with something a lot more textured. And then we have the overlay textures. So these are textures that I would use in clipping masks and add texture to particular parts of the painting. These are not really papers, but I wanted to add them to the set because I think it helps to round out the set and give you a lot more options, because papers are nice, but sometimes it's nice to add a little bit texture to your painting itself that isn't a paper texture. So we have a few of those. And then for the people who really love foil, we have some foil textures. These are also meant to be used with clipping masks, and we will talk about that in this video. And at the very bottom of the brush set, there is my email. So if you have any questions, you can always contact me, colorwithkendi@gmail.com. So that covers the brief walkthrough of all of the files. Now let's talk about how to use the paper textures. Okay, so in this sample painting, as you can see, I have applied a paper texture to this. This is actually a canvas texture. And I wanted to show you what it would look like if I removed that texture. So you can go to the layers panel, and there's a paper overlay. So that is the texture that you see on top of your painting. If I were to remove it, that's what it looks like. And then there is a paper background. If I remove that by tapping there, do you see it looks really plain? It's a really great starting point. So you can paint with any brush set of your choice, and this becomes your starting point, and then you can apply paper textures to it. And I usually like to apply a paper texture to the background and then also a paper texture on top, because that way I have a lot more flexibility. I can always turn things on and off and change the opacity. I'm going to show you how to use a paper texture brush. So let's go to the brush library, and you can pick any of the paper texture brushes here. They all work in the same way. So I'm going to pick, let's say, Sunflower Press Large. This is brush number 15. Now we're going to select a color for this brush, because if I use the color I have right here, as you can see, I have this bluish green and I applied it, it looks a little bit off. For the paper texture brushes, I do think they don't look as good with colors. It does look a lot better and a lot more natural with gray. And I like to use a mid-tone gray. So to get a mid-tone gray, all you have to do is go to your color menu and make sure you're on disc mode. And then what I do is I tap right here at the 9 o'clock position, double tap. It will snap to a mid-tone gray. I think the color, if you want to be precise about the hexadecimal code, is 7F, 7F, 7F. That is the color that I typically use for these paper texture brushes. And what I will do, so let me just make sure I am in the right layer, because you don't want to put the paper texture right in the same layer as you're painting, because then it's all going to be in one layer. Always a good idea to have it in a different layer. So what I have here is I have a group, it's called paper background, and then I have a paper texture here from before. Remember that canvas texture? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn that off. I'm going to go to plus and create a new layer, and we're going to put a new paper texture here. So I'm just going to call this new, so you know that it's not what came with the canvas. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I am at size 100. I find it easier to use these brushes at the largest size. And with one motion, without lifting my pencil, I'm going to apply the texture onto the screen. So that's what that texture looks like. Now, if I lift my pencil midway, so let me show you. So if I apply a little bit of texture and then I lift my pencil and apply more, do you see there's subtle overlap? I want to avoid that. These brushes are transparent, and the reason why is you can layer on different textures that way a lot more easily. So because they are transparent, if you lift your pencil and then apply more pigment, it's going to become this overlap, and that's not really what we're going for. So my suggestion is with any of these brushes, I'll show you this with another brush. So let's say I go to Iris Press Large, same thing. Apply it with one motion without lifting your pencil, because if you lift your pencil, you're going to see that, and that's not what we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that brush number 15 and apply the texture. And at this point, if you feel like the texture is not strong enough for you, what I suggest is you go to the layers panel, and where you have that texture, you can duplicate it. So all you want to do is make sure you have that layer selected, swipe to the left, and duplicate. And it will duplicate it. It will make it a lot more intense. This is a bit too intense. So what you can do is tap on N, and you can change the opacity. This is your opacity slider, and you can just make it a little bit lower. You can play around with it until you get something that you like. And with each brush, it's going to be a little bit different. So let me delete this and let me create another layer. Let's try another brush. I'm just going to rename this new 2. I'm going to turn this layer off, and let's try another brush. So I'm going to go back to that Iris Press Large, and I'm going to do the same thing and apply the paper texture. So as you can see, this paper texture already is a lot more apparent. So in this case, I may not want to double it up, because if I double it up, it's too much, right? But for this brush, Iris Press, what I'd like to do is actually go to N and reduce the opacity here. So each paper texture is a little bit different. In some cases, you may want to double up. In some cases, you may just want to change the opacity of the layer. So I actually kind of like it here. So it depends on what you like. It's all customizable. So that is how you can create the paper background. Now, as you can see, is we only see the paper texture in the background right now. We're not seeing it on our object. Now, if you want the paper texture to show up on your object, let's make the paper texture in the paper overlay section. So I'm going to close this group. I'm going to open up this group here. So we already have a paper texture from before. I'm going to turn that off. And then I'm going to tap on that and then tap on plus. So it creates another layer right above. And I'm going to tap on this and rename it. I'm going to call this new. And what I want to do now is with that same brush, that Iris Press Large brush number 21, I'm going to apply the texture onto the screen. But as you can see, it's making our shape look a little bit gray. So we need to do one more thing. We need to change the blend mode. So let's go back to that layers panel, and where it says N, tap on it. And this is our opacity slider. Right below, we have our blend modes. And let's change it to color burn. So now I hope you can see that with color burn, it no longer has that gray tone that it had earlier. Say if I go back, do you see that gray tone? Not looking good. That works fine for a background, but when you're applying a paper texture on top of an object, it doesn't look so good. So I personally, like to change it to color burn. You can play around with other blend modes as well. It's totally, see, that gives it a completely different look. It's really up to you. So you can play around with the blend mode. Some of them have interesting results, but I typically like to keep it at color burn. Now, as you can see, with color burn, it's very faint. Now, if I zoom out, for me, this is actually pretty good. I don't like to have a paper texture that's too strong in my paintings, but if you want this to become more intense, you can. It's totally customizable. So you can go into your layers panel, and then where you have that layer, you can duplicate it, much like what we did for the background. So let's just go swipe to the left and duplicate. Do you see now this looks a lot more intense? But what you'll notice is because we have added this paper overlay, even our paper background has become a little bit more intense as a result of that. And that is completely okay. We can go to our layers panel. Let's close this group. Let's go back to our paper background group. And let's go to this layer, new 2. Tap on N, and then we can reduce the opacity. There we go. Now I think that looks a little bit better. And you can do this with any of the paper brushes. So all of these steps that I've shown you, you can use it with the subtle paper textures, the not as subtle paper textures, as well as all of the canvas textures. It's the same process. Pick a mid-tone gray, and then create a background and create an overlay. So that is how to use the paper texture brushes. And because it is customizable, you can change the opacity and the blend mode so you get something that you like. Now, before we move on to the other brushes in the set, I wanted to point out one thing. So when we apply a paper texture, especially when we're applying the paper texture on top in this paper overlay layer, what's happening is our painting looks a lot darker than it originally was. But I just want to show you that. So if I remove that paper overlay, do you see that painting looks a little bit lighter? But when you apply an overlay, it always becomes a little bit more intense. And that's just the nature of any paper texture that you apply. Because the paper texture has some inherent color in it, it's going to darken your painting a little bit. So what I like to do generally is I like to set up my paper overlay and my paper background before I start painting, because that way I can select the right colors that work well with the paper that I selected. But sometimes that's not how it's going to work. Sometimes you've already completed a painting, it's already on its own layer, and you want to apply a paper texture afterwards. Now, If you're okay with the color changing, no problem. Like, I actually kind of like what the paper did to this. It made it more interesting, a little bit more saturated and a little darker, so it pops a bit more. But in some cases, it might change your painting too much. And in that case, what you can do is you can actually adjust your painting layer. So here I have my painting. So I can make it a little bit lighter. I can go into my adjustments panel and I can go to hue, saturation, and brightness, and I can fiddle around with the brightness. I can actually make it a little bit brighter, tidbit, not too much. You don't want to go crazy. And I can make it a little bit less saturated, and it can make it a little bit lighter. And you can also play around with the curves. I undid that. You can also play around with the curves as well. You can go to where it says gamma, and you can take this node right here at the bottom, and you can move it up a little bit. It will make it a little bit lighter. Do you see it's a little bit lighter? It looks more like what it originally looked like. So those are two options for you in case your painting ended up becoming too dark. So keep in mind, I'm gonna cancel that. So keep in mind, you can always adjust that. So now let's move on and talk about the overlay brushes. If you go to the brush library, right below canvases, we have some overlay textures. And these are textures that I would add on top of my paintings. So that's why I say overlay. It's kind of like it's an overlay. And you can do this with or without a paper texture. So in this case, what I want to do is I'm going to remove that paper texture from the top, and I'm going to apply some of these overlay textures on top of this painting. So what I like to do is do it in a separate layer. I am a big believer in using separate layers for everything, so that way you can make changes. If you do everything in the same layer, it's hard to make changes. So I've added a new layer, and I'm going to add some textures here. So I'm just going to name this texture 1. And I'm going to choose, let's see, you can choose any of these brushes. So I'm going to choose brush number 35. And with these brushes, you don't have to use a mid-tone gray. You can use any color that you like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually select a color from this painting. So kind of like that color. So I'm going to press and hold and select. That's how you can select. And then I'm going to apply this texture all over. Okay, so now you can tell this texture is everywhere, but I don't want it to be everywhere. I want it to be only on my painting, only on the objects underneath. So one way to do this is to apply it as a clipping mask. So all you have to do, it sounds more complicated, it really is not, just tap on that texture 1 layer and tap on clipping mask. And what it's done is it's applied your texture all over your painting. Now, for this painting, this particular texture doesn't quite work, and it's kind of changing too much here, but you can see how it can be applied. Now, I think for this painting, maybe another texture might work better. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clear this with 3-finger swipe, and I'm going to add, actually the crackle one, I can show you what it looks like. I don't think it will look that great with this painting. As you can see, it's a very subtle crackle effect. Depending on the painting, different effects will work. So for this one, I think it's not bad, but I don't think it's the ideal one. Maybe another one might work better. I'm going to go to brush number 37. This is Grungy Texture B, and I am going to apply it everywhere. Yeah, this is adding some interesting effect here, but I do think that the color is not working up here. Do you see it's getting in the way of the sparkly diamonds? So in that case, what you can do, you can always erase the texture away from the areas where you don't want it, or you can apply the texture to specific elements in your painting if you have all of your elements in different layers. Now, in this case, in this example, I have everything in one layer. Typically, that's not how I paint. I would have each element in a different layer. So what I would do is I would maybe just add that texture to this area, and I wouldn't add it up here. So that is totally up to you. It's customizable. The other thing you could do, I'm going to show you, is you can go back and use that mid-tone gray. So I'm going to use that mid-tone gray that we used. So double tap at the 9 o'clock position. It will snap to that mid-tone gray. And then I'm going to apply that texture everywhere without lifting the pencil. It looks absolutely crazy right now, but hold on. What we're going to do is go to the layers panel and tap on in. We're going to change the blend mode until we find something that we like. So hold on. What I'm going to do is go to color burn. Do you see with color burn, it looks fine. It does not look good without the color burn. Multiply doesn't look right. You can experiment. Experiment until you find something. Color dodge is interesting. It's not working with this painting, but it could work with another painting. So play around. It's all about having some fun. Oh, this one's kind of interesting. It's all about having some fun. You can change the colors. And yeah, it doesn't work with that. I think color burn, it works for this particular painting. So I'm going to duplicate it because I don't think it's strong enough. So whenever you think something is not strong enough, you can always duplicate. All of these brushes have slight transparency, so you can always duplicate. That's interesting. A little bit too intense though, but let's have a look. It changes the vibe of the painting. I don't know if it works at this level, so I'm just going to tap on color burn and then I'm going to reduce the opacity. Yeah, I think it works at this level. What do you think? With every painting, it's going to be a little bit different. I think it works with this one, and I want to show you what this area looks like without that on. Do you see? It looks far less textured. This just adds a little bit more visual interest. So with these brushes, it's all about experimenting and finding something that works for you. Now let's talk about the foil brushes. So before we talk about the foil brushes, I just wanted to remove some of these texture layers just so that you can really focus on the foil. So I'm going to remove that texture layer that we made earlier. And what I'm going to do is I am going to remove this paper texture. So now I have no paper texture, and I'm going to add a subtle paper texture. So I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to add a subtle one here. I do think if you want the foil to shine, then the paper texture you use for your canvas should ideally be a softer one. That's just my opinion. You can do what works for you. So I have a mid-tone gray, and I'm going to pick one of the subtle textures. So maybe Rose Press Small, very subtle. The smaller ones tend to be even more subtle. And without lifting my pencil, just going to apply the texture. Do you see how subtle and simple that is? Very simple. So that is good. And now let's talk about the foil. Okay, so foil should, oops, I keep pressing the wrong things. So the foil should always be added in its own layer. So what I'm going to do is tap on plus, create a layer, and I'm going to call this layer foil. You don't have to name your layers. I'm just doing it because it's a little easier to show you. And then you can select any color foil that you want. Although I don't think white or black works very good, but other colors, no problem. So to select gold foil, you want to go somewhere around here between yellow and orange and kind of around there. You might want to experiment and find the right color that works for you. Or there's a color that I have written down in my notepad. Hold on. It's B88311. So in order to type in a hexadecimal code, just go to value, and then you have your hexadecimal, and let's type that in. So what was it? B88311. I have tested this out before, so yeah, that color works well for gold. This is kind of closer to yellow, but you can go a little closer to orange depending on what you like. So then what we want to do is, with one motion, without lifting our pencil, apply the foil everywhere on the screen. And I think I did something wrong because I don't think I'm on the right. Yeah, I'm not on the right brush. So let's go to the foil brushes. So we have 3 foil brushes. You can pick any one that you like. They're all somewhat similar, but slightly different. That's why there's foil texture A, B, and C. Whenever I have an A, B, or C, or D in my brushes, it means they are similar, but slightly different. So foil texture A, I'm going to use that one, and I'm going to apply it everywhere. So there we have our foil texture everywhere. So now we have the foil texture. As you can see, it's slightly transparent. If you want to make it more apparent, you can always duplicate it by swiping to the left. and make it stronger. I think that's a little bit too strong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap on N and make it a little less strong. So get it to the level that you like. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pinch these two layers and merge it. So we have the foil everywhere right now, but we don't want the foil everywhere. I want the foil to only be on certain parts of the painting. And in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this foil to a clipping mask layer. But before I do that, I need to put another layer right on top of the painting. Because if I make this a clipping mask right here, it's going to apply the foil all over our earrings. That's not working for me. That's not the intended result. So I'm going to tap on painting, tap on plus, and create another layer. And this is where I'm going to make some line art. And then I'm going to make that foil show up only on the line art. So what I'm going to do is tap on foil and make it a clipping mask. So now anything that I paint in this line art layer will have foil attached to it as a clipping mask. So let me show you. Now I am going to make some line art. So do you see where we have all that gold? I'm going to make some line art there. I'm going to do this with an opaque brush. This is really important. If you are applying foil to something, it needs to be opaque. If it's transparent and the foil is also, as you remember, somewhat transparent, it's not going to work. So I'm going to go, you can use any brush that you like. I'm going to go into my amazing watercolor brush pack and I'm going to pick an opaque brush. Brush number 43 is quite opaque and it's great for doing some line art. It has a little bit of texture. So what I'm going to do is in this layer here, I am going to draw wherever we have this gold, I'm going to draw and it will end up having that gold texture applied to it. But something to keep in mind is that you want to make sure that whatever you're drawing in this layer is white. So I'm going to show you. If I draw with this color, you see, I'm drawing with this color and the foil is also that color. You're not getting the foil texture. Do you see that? You don't see that. Now, if I did the exact same thing and I did it with pure white, so to get to pure white, go into the disk mode and double tap at the, I guess this is 1030 position. And do you see now I am getting that foil. So what a difference. So it's very important to use white. If you use black, it's not going to look right. Do you see? It's just not right. It does not look like foil. It's very important to use white to do your line art. And then what is going to happen is anything you make in this layer will have foil attached on top. So now I'm going to show you what you can do with this. So right here, I have all of this that is actually gold, right? It's supposed to be gold. I painted it to look like gold, but now I'm applying foil. So I've completed the foil. I haven't done a really great job. I'm just kind of showing this as an example, but you can add as much or as little as you want. And at this point, you may be happy with it, but you might want to change the color. If you want to change the color, all you have to do is go to Layers panel, go to that foil layer, then tap on Adjustments, Hue, Saturation, Brightness, and you can change everything here. So let's play around with this. So let's say I wanted to change the hue. I wanted to make it rose gold. There it is. I mean, it's a bit hard to see now because it's rose gold, but as you can tell, you have that option to change things. So I'm going to change it to what it was originally. You can also reduce the saturation. So if you want to make it a little less saturated, and now it's kind of silver. If you go and reduce the saturation to none, it will look more silver. It doesn't quite work with this painting, but that is also an option. You can always change your foil to silver. I kind of like it there. And you can reduce the brightness. Do you see that changes the look? You can increase, don't increase the brightness too much because then you're going to lose that foil effect. So you can really play around and change that color, which is really nice. So that's it for today. I hope you learned everything you need to know to get started with this brush set. If you do have any questions, you can always send me an email. And if you don't have the brush set yet and I have piqued your interest, please check it out on my website. I will see you in the next video. Bye!